And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. Welcome to What's Up with Power this morning. I am Justin Wagner with Team ODZ. We've got a group ride lining up here on Zwift that's about to roll in about 40 seconds. We are happy today to have a wonderful guest speaker again, Taylor Thomas. He's been busy a bit this summer and we haven't had the privilege of hearing him, but he's back after his busy summer schedule and happy to have him. We're going to be talking about preparing for the season to come. So we're winding down summer, we're transitioning into fall, and a lot of us are kind of trying to figure out what exactly we want to do for next year. So that is what today's topic is going to be all about. Bring Taylor on the screen. How's it going there, Taylor?
Good, Justin. How are you?
I am doing great. So I've got your slide on the screen, your title slide, and I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to lead the group ride, okay?
Right on. Well, how's everybody doing this morning? Thanks for joining us. Like Justin said, I've been gone for a handful of weeks, but I'm excited to be back, and we're going to talk about what transitioning into the off season looks like, and then how to use that and how to think about transitioning or planning for next season. So some of us are winding down. If you're coming off of particular seasons, you might be doing cyclocross, or might still be trying to kind of milk different disciplines into the fall and winter. But regardless, now is still a really good time to think about what those transitions look like, and what next season is going to look like, and ultimately how to plan for that. So we'll dive right in. There's a lot to cover. Justin, if you're not on the first slide, you can go to that one for me. Broad season review. So the first place that I like to start is looking back at the past season. I like to look at just kind of a bird's eye view of what were the major trends. What did some of your core metrics look like? Things like CTL, ATL, TSB. From a qualitative perspective, did you accomplish your goals? Did you do well in the races you wanted to do well in? Did you podium? Did you reach certain levels of fitness? Whatever those look like for you, it's good just to take kind of an objective bird's eye view and look back at what the season looked like, to start to position yourself to think more critically about the past season and about the season to come. When you want to get into specifics, a great place to start is the PMC, the performance management chart. This particular one on the slide is from WKO4, which is part of the suite of features with Training Peaks. Some of you may be familiar with WKO. The reason I like this particular PMC chart is I can overlay peak power numbers, which are these dots that you can see, the orange dots, green dots, gray dots, and so on. I can overlay those on top of the PMC chart to get a sense for power-based trends in relation to some of those core metrics that I mentioned, CTL, TSB, and so on. This is a great way to, again, look for those major trends. Did you hit peak powers at the appropriate times? Did CTL perform like you wanted it to? This particular PMC chart is an athlete's basically an entire season from build up to transition, so from left to right. To further that, looking at peak powers is a great way to start to understand how your season went from a performance perspective. Again, using something like a PMC here with the peak power overlay, we can look for, and one of the things I like to do is look and see if the peak powers were appropriate to the types of training that we were doing. So we can see kind of in the middle of the chart at the bottom for this particular athlete, the green or blue dots and the gray dots are peak 5 and 20-minute powers. Those align with the focus on threshold level efforts as we built into the season. This particular athlete was a road racer, more specifically a criterium racer. So as we transitioned out of that and moved into race specificity, we can see towards the right-hand side of the chart that we have a big clump of peak 5-second powers at the top above the CTL line. So it lets us know that generally we were focused on the right things at the right time, and that in theory the training that we were doing was in line with helping us reach our goals. The power duration curve, another chart inside of WKO4. I'll go into specifics of some training peaks specific charts as well for those that don't use WKO. But the power duration curve is another great place to check for those broad trends. What was your power doing? Did you see major shifts in your watts per kilogram at particular times of the season? And anywhere with these charts, you can segment out specific time or date ranges or time zones, and look for trends that align with particular periods of your season, whether that's key workouts, big races, build ups to specific events, whatever that is. So that's kind of how I like to approach the bird's eye view and the broad season review. Justin, next slide. So after we've done that, we can go to the details. We can start to look at specific performances and what those actually looked like. And again, always comparing the qualitative with the quantitative. So making sure that we have a metrics-backed approach, but that we understand how those things felt, what they looked like emotionally, what they looked like in terms of the wear and tear on your body. So there's also the qualitative component as well that's always playing into to this. So we use the broad overview to pinpoint key date ranges. So again, whether that's specific races or breakthrough workouts. Then what we want to do is we want to dig in deeper, and we want to pinpoint those key performances, and then start to look at what those looked like. So one of the ways I like to do that, and I mentioned it a little bit with the PMC chart, is look at peak powers or critical power numbers. Once you dig in and pinpoint that specific effort, what do those power numbers look like for that effort? Do they align with what you think should have happened? Again, if it's a criterium race, are you seeing peak 5, 10, 20-second power numbers? Or are you seeing peak 5-minute and 20-minute numbers? And so that helps to understand if the effort that you put out aligns with the discipline correctly and what you expected to happen. Time and zones, so just your time in your individualized power zones is a great way to understand kind of the physiological impact of a specific effort. There's two ways to do this. You can look at time and zones for one event, and again, workout, race, whatever that is. And you can look to see how that power was distributed across your zones. Another good way to do it is to look at a particular time period or date range and look at that zone distribution as well. So again, maybe you had a big build-up to an A priority race. Conversely, maybe you were in a transition period and you were under some lighter training load. Looking at how the time and zones looks for those slightly longer date ranges, not an entire season and not an entire training block, but maybe a handful of weeks or a few days before and after a key event can really help you kind of nail down what those efforts look like. And then lastly, distribution charts, like the one on the slide here. Again, similar to time and zones, a great way to look at how power is distributed. Distribution charts are for a specific effort, so we can look and see what a race looked like. And the way that I like to use that is to start to understand, was the effort appropriate for the outcome that we were looking for? So if the goal is to win the race and you look at the distribution chart and you see that the majority of the power is shifted to the left-hand side of the distribution chart, that might tell you that although you thought that you put it all on the line and you went for broke to try to win, if the outcome wasn't what you expected, potentially the answer is in the distribution chart. Had the power been shifted more to the right, the outcome could have been different. So again, just trying to understand what those efforts look like and kind of paint the complete picture. Next slide, Justin. All right, so we did the broad overview, done a detailed overview. Now it's time to plan your transition. And so the transition is exactly what it sounds like. It's the time from when you go to very race-focused efforts to moving towards towards an off-season, moving towards some downtime in your training. That can look very different for every athlete, but ultimately the transition is also the time when you can sit down and you can start to very critically analyze past performances and plan for the future. So, like I mentioned before, we always want to have a metrics-based approach. So we want our decisions to be rooted in our core power-based metrics. So whether that's understanding if we what our CTL goals are, what our ramp rate should be, TSB. We want to make sure to understand what that means both for the off season and what that means for the season to come. Planning time off. This is one of those things. Again, that's different for every athlete. Are you going to take time off at all? Some athletes don't need complete downtime. Some need lighter training load. Some need a focus on cross training. Some need, depending on the focus from the past race season, some need several weeks completely off. It depends on, in my experience, I think how you respond mentally to time off. So is that going to be really important to you to have that downtime to focus on other things and then come back into training refocused and kind of reignited and excited to train? Or is that downtime gonna really disrupt your training overall? And is it best to keep some sort of consistent touch point from a training perspective and continue to maybe not build but to maintain fitness? So that's different for everybody, and you have to ask yourself that question. And the transition or leading up to the transition is the time to ask that question. When do you need to start your transition? Ultimately, the answer is you have to work backwards from your goals. You have to first identify what you want to accomplish in the season to come. How fit do you want to be? Whether there's very specific goals like FTP goals or maximum power goals. Maybe you have there's CTL goals that you want to have for your opening A priority race of the season. Knowing what that looks like and then working backwards will allow you to plan for when that should start. So again, you have to factor in an appropriate base period, build period, race specificity. There's all these components that are specific to you as an athlete, but have to be there. And so you work backwards from your goals, and you can begin to understand and start to realize when you should actually start the transition. Again, time off. And then the build and base period, or base and build, and then lastly, using the ATP, the annual training plan in Training Peaks, is a fantastic way. So what I just described about working backwards is fairly easily done in the ATP. You can set CTL goals for your A and B priority races. You can manually adjust weekly TSS goals as well as ramp rate. So once you sort out your season, once you look back at past seasons and you understand what an appropriate CTL ceiling is for you, then you can prescribe those numbers or assign those numbers to your goal races, and then work backwards to make sure that the buildup is appropriate, that you're not overdoing it on TSS, that the ramp rate isn't too extreme. And you can work back through several months to where you're currently at, and you can basically have your roadmap into next season laid out in front of you. So the ATP is a really, really valuable tool once you highlight what the specific metrics are that you need to hit moving into next season. Next slide, Justin. All right, so now it's time to write your training. If the ATP is kind of the starting place, that's your broad overview, that's your roadmap, then you actually want to put pen to paper and start to to look at things from a workout perspective. So from a weekly or a monthly or a training block perspective. And the most important piece of that is not to wait and do it, right? So early in the season, whether it's now or whether it's several weeks from now, depending on what you're doing in your race season, you want to start to do that as soon as possible. So you want to work with the ATP, work backwards, identify those metrics, and then start to build your plan. And you don't have to write every workout for every training block, but I think understanding what those workouts need to look like, the goal for each particular training block, is going to really help you kind of wrap your head around what the off season looks like, and what you need to do to be successful coming into next season. Most importantly is to include everything in that plan. So what I mean by that is that you should include things like transition time. You should include, if you're going to take time off, obviously you should include that. You should include the build up to race specificity as you get into next season, base and build periods, whatever those particular segments are, and whatever they look like for you as an athlete. Include them all early on. And again, it doesn't have to be down to specific power ranges, specific numbers, but I think that it helps to see that runway very clearly, and that really sets you up for success going into next season if you understand what the next several months are going to look like and what the goals for those particular segments of your training are. And then lastly, I mentioned race specificity. This is very, very simply just applying the numbers that you uncover when you go through the detailed review. So again, matching what the powers need to look like from a performance perspective to the specific race discipline. You'll use that to inform what the workouts ultimately look like. So you want to match. In training the rigors of race day. And so race specificity usually starts about 8 to 12 weeks back from your first A priority race. So that's a parameter that you can use, again, depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you want to accomplish, but backdate your training 8 to 12 weeks from your first A race, and start to layer in some of those race specific efforts. Again, dependent on your discipline. So if you are a crit racer, that's going to look different than if you're a time trialist or a cross-country mountain bike racer. But again, understanding when that transition needs to happen into race specificity is just going to help you kind of further dial things in as you look down that runway. So that's all I have. We'll kick it back to Justin, take it to questions and answers, and thank you guys for tuning in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Taylor. We appreciate the insights. Let everyone know that if you do have questions, we will be addressing them. So feel free you can let them fly in the game or in the Facebook live video. We'll relay them and get them addressed. And I think you did a great job here. And I think the underlying theme that I'm pulling out of this is you have a retrospection section where you're kind of reflecting back on how you've done this year, what went well, then that's transitioning into, okay, what are we gonna shoot for next, and how are we gonna get there? What's the overarching goal for the next season, and then build a plan to get there, and use the right tools. Use the annual training planner in Training Peaks. If you're a Training Peaks user, it'll definitely help you figure out when you should and shouldn't be taking hard and easy weeks. These are things that if we don't see the whole plan, we may get lost, and we may not apply we call it basically overstressing, right? Where we go harder and then we back off to rest. So you actually get stronger during those rest periods. So actually one thing I wanted to kind of bring up is I think, we probably overlook the importance of time off. I had some forced time off during this season from a broken collarbone. Ended up taking a full week off before I kind of got back into training. But I noticed that I had before I was almost getting to the point where maybe a little, I would say, not quite sure or motivated or not sure where I was aiming for. But after I took that week off, it was a lot more rejuvenated to basically hit the training hard again. So something to think about. But I think Taylor also hit the nail on the head that everyone's gonna be different with time off, and it really depends on your individual needs. And I think one thing I noticed from that was that the transition back can be very risky because as you take more and more time off, you get really used to not working out, and it can be really hard when you get back in. So just being aware of that and knowing that, you know, you don't want to settle into not ever getting back on the bike, right? That would be probably an issue for your health. I mean, most of us are here because we want to stay fit and stay healthy. Most of us, like probably all of us on this stream, don't make our livelihood from riding a bike. So I certainly don't. Anyway, great topics here. And I think one thing I want to add in terms of kind of your forward planning for next year is pick specific achievable goals. You know, look at what you've done this year. Say, okay, how do we take that one step further? Now, I mean, and look at the size of that step. You don't want to basically say, okay, so I finished maybe in the top 10 and all of my crits this year, and now I want to win them all next year. That might be a big step. I don't know. I mean, it depends on your local group and everything, but the point here is be realistic about that step, because if you try to stretch yourself too much, you basically will lose the motivation as you try really hard to get there. You can't quite get there. You get unmotivated. So we want realistic goals that you can achieve and maybe even overachieve. That way you definitely, I find for myself that those goals help drive me further much more than a goal that's what I would call basically pie in the sky. And it's just a really big stretch. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'll add to that quickly. I think, you know, one of the things I like to do is to schedule races, intermediate or races that you build through to get to maybe a stretch goal, right? So you don't want at the start of the season your first priority race to be a race that, if you're being realistic, that you think, you know, may or may not go according to plan, right? It's going to be a stretch goal in terms of fitness. It's going to be a stretch goal in terms of performance. I think it's important to have those, but to your point, you know, if you come out of the gate and you set yourself up and you put yourself in a position, you know, it can be demoralizing if it doesn't go according to plan, and that can really set the pace for the rest of the season. So think very critically about your race calendar or your event calendar, you know, and maybe in the spring, maybe you're not doing your hardest race, right? Because you want to, fitness isn't linear, and so you have to build through that, and so it can be good. There's nothing wrong with putting races on the calendar that are going to be, you know, mental boosters. They're going to be good fitness boosters. You know, and you can use those situations or use those races as a springboard to gain momentum and build towards you know, something that is a stretch goal. But maybe by the time you get to that stretch goal, you're in both a mental and a physical space to perform, you know, better than you would if you were to put yourself in that position early in the season. So yeah, I think it's really easy at the end of this season to think about next season and like you said, Justin, kind of be pie in the sky about it. Like, well, next year is going to be awesome. You know, I'm gonna crush every goal I've ever had, and that's, you know, that's okay. to a certain extent, but from a training perspective, be realistic about how you, put pen to paper, and when you kind of start to put your nose to the grindstone, so to speak, that you're training in a fashion and in a way that's productive, and that you're not overreaching and setting yourself up to be disappointed. Race in and race out. You want to have those achievable goals, and those can be very, very small, right? It doesn't have to be race related. It can be metrics related. Again, reaching certain CTLs by the time you get to a race, getting back to a certain threshold, hitting peak power numbers. That can be very, very individualized and fairly small, and you can set those waypoints along the way to make sure that you arrive to those stretch goals motivated and physically prepared to execute.
Absolutely. And something that kind of came to mind as you were mentioning that is maybe a specific example of a goal that is a much more realistic goal. So, as we upgrade through categories in, let's say we're in USA Cycling, upgrade to a new category. So now we're going to race in a whole different pack, different league of people. You feel you've got a lot of steam behind you as you get these upgrades, and you're feeling pretty good. But it's really easy to think, man, I'm going to go out there and do really well in the next category. But almost is a lot better to say, look, my very first race in this next category, my goal should probably be nothing more than I don't want to get dropped in the first mile. If I make it past the first mile and not get dropped, I'm doing good. Don't go out there and attack from the gun, because you probably will get dropped right after, when you're dead and they all blow past you. But things like that, where it's like, okay, we got to feel the waters. We got to test to see what our fitness is like. And those tests can take multiple iterations. And you kind of alluded to this when you were talking about, build-up races to a very high priority race. It does a couple things, actually. So it allows you to train, go through the motions, learn, fail, figure out what worked, what didn't work as you do these multiple events leading up to your priority one. But on the other hand, it also gives you opportunities to succeed. You may end up having a very good performance on one of those build-up races that teaches you something about yourself or your training that you wouldn't have realized. And as a backup, you could feel good about that accomplishment in the build-up. Let's say for whatever reason you get sick before your priority event. Well, if you hadn't done anything other than train before your priority event, and then you get sick 3 days before it, you're gonna feel like your whole season was just a wash, right? You just lost it all. So these are kind of like, setting achievable goals, and as well as giving yourself multiple opportunities to achieve those goals. Nobody likes being a failure. So I guess you say, make it so you can pat yourself on the back. Even if nobody else will, at least pat yourself on the back so you feel good and continue training, right? And what do you have to say about that, Taylor?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm a big advocate for not putting too much pressure on one race. The athletes that I work with, we have multiple A priority races throughout the season, but within those races, there's different kind of levels of priority. And so, it's not reasonable to build the entire season to one specific day and hope that everything goes great, right? Because racing, by nature is completely unpredictable, right? You can do everything that you can to be fit and prepared, and then you have no idea how the race is going to play out. And the body is very, very dynamic and nuanced machine, and some days go great and some days don't, and some days the field responds the way you think they're going to, and some days they're totally unpredictable and they leave you in the dust. So yeah, I think that, again, back to being realistic. It's not realistic to think that all the stars can align season after season on one specific date. So having races you can build through. Again, it's okay to have several A priority or high priority races, but within those have different goals. So, you know, when I think about an A priority race, to me, that means that we want to do a taper, right? We want the athlete to be in form. We want TSB to be positive. We want CTL to be at a peak for that particular block of training or that particular time period. It doesn't have to be as high as it's going to be all season. It just has to be at a peak for that particular time period. ATL should be low. So we treat that priority race differently, and we treat it with respect, and we bring the athlete in where they're feeling fit and they're in form, they're feeling fresh. But then from a race perspective, there's a whole variety of different goals around that, and those are different for each specific race, and they can be based on the particular field that's going to be at that race, right? If the athlete has experience with that field, maybe it's just to finish in the top 20. If it's an early season race, because we know that field is really competitive, and you know they're really going to kind of bring out all the big guns. Maybe it's just to kind of build experience or build confidence, right? Maybe it's just to stay upright on the bike because it's a really technical course. There's all these things that you can be an A priority race and you can treat it that way, but it doesn't mean that you have to win it. Not every time. So yeah, I think there's kind of goals within goals, and breaking that out again early on, and laying that runway and understanding and being very clear about what your goals are very, very specifically for each event, can help you, you know, mentally be much more prepared to tackle the season. If every single race on your calendar is do or die or the be all end all, that's a pretty stressful race season. And that's going to make for very kind of very hectic and very manic training, because everything rides on every single workout. So yeah, I think being realistic and understanding the place of each event can really help to shape and mold a much more successful and lucrative, you know, training season.
Awesome. Great. Well, we are out of time, so we're going to wrap things up. I want to say thank you again once more to Taylor for his great insights. If you want to get a hold of him, we got his contact info here. Company is Thomas Endurance Coaching. Website's thomasendurancecoaching.com. Follow him on Twitter at endurance_coach. And you can email him directly at taylor@thomasendurancecoaching.com. So we will see you guys again on this show next week. It's every week, 6:30 a.m. Pacific, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 30 minutes long, and we have lots of other great content on the channel daily. So if you want to check that out, hit like on the channel, and we will be notified next time we go live with lots more good cycling and Zwift content for you. So we appreciate time. I want to say thanks to Training Peaks. They are a sponsor of the show, and they offer a discount code for anyone who, if you decide to use the Training Peaks services, they do offer you a 20% off using the code ODZ20. ODZ20 gets yourself 20% off Training Peaks premium services. So with that, we will sign off and say thank you, and we will see you next time.